So, welcome everyone who's joining us live. Today I'm joined by Callum, who is, I've already forgotten your role. Do you mind giving us a brief about yourself, Callum?
No worries. So, hi everyone. I'm Callum Akehurst-Ryan. I am a senior tester at Improbable, and I've been testing for the best part of 14 years across a number of different industries: e-commerce, public safety, building tills and cash points, finance and banking, and the like. I've got a really strong interest in exploratory testing, especially when it comes to human factors, design, and accessibility, but also a passion for getting involved full stack through the code with my exploratory testing as well.
Okay, cool. Thanks for the intro. I'm really looking forward to this pairing session. The topic for today is going to be accessibility testing, and we're going to try and do a deep dive using some exploratory testing techniques and some of the tools that we can use for accessibility. But I guess before I jump into the testing per se, do you mind giving us a brief overview of what's involved with accessibility?
Yeah, of course. So accessibility is effectively a design practice. It's a design practice that allows the maximum number of people to engage with your product and your software. That's what we're sort of getting at here. What we tend to think of as accessibility is just the tip of the iceberg. So we'll tend to think about things like screen readers and whether we can see things on the screen. But actually, it's a lot more than that. We have to talk about things like vision-based, cognitive-based, physical-based, audio-based, and learning-based disabilities. We also have to think about the fact that the types of disabilities that there might be can include aging, temporary or invisible disabilities, situational, or even minor disabilities. Sam, you and I both have glasses on, for example, which is a very minor disability, especially if we take them off. But things like that we have to think about.
Yeah.
So to sum that back round, it's effectively a design practice that focuses on the fact that there's no such thing as a typical user, and that the law of averages doesn't really translate to product design and development. So we're looking at real people's needs, real people's goals when it comes to interacting it with and using our products.
I'm just pulling up one of my own blogs at the moment,
Uh,
and where I've got some of the stats for different accessibility. I can't spell accessibility. I can never spell accessibility. Accessibility. There we go. I've gone through temporary disabilities myself. I once broke my ankle and I couldn't walk for 12 weeks. It's pretty common for someone to have a limb that's injured and unable to be used for a while. So what were some of the stats? So there is a general stat. 1 in 5 people will have some sort of impairment. And so that represents about 4 million Australians. I'm pretty sure I've got a UK stat around here too as well. I'll have to have a look for that one.
I think it's about the same. It's 1 in 5 people in the UK.
Yeah.
1 in 5 potential customers have a disability.
Yeah, so it's or 2.3% of the US population have some sort of vision impairment. And I can't quite remember where the other one was. Yeah, but they're fairly consistent, and it's pretty common for people to experience some sort of temporary disability, and it correlates with age generally as you get older. It's, I think, 2/3 of retirees live with some form of disability or impairment too.
Yeah, and it's important to sort of recognize that, especially as we try to drive people forwards into thinking about accessibility needs, is to remember that our customers, as they are now, or what we think of as our customer base now. As we sort of go forwards, as people start to age, they're much more likely to have those accessibility needs. So we like longevity in customers. We like having people continue to use our products. So we can start to think about how to keep those users going forward, how we can ensure that we're supporting them as we go forward into the future as well. That sounded really futuristic. I like that. As we go into the future with these types of things.
Yeah. Oh, no, you continue.
No, that was a good stopping point for me.
Yeah.
Okay.
I just wanted to let anyone know who's watching us live. I will be monitoring the chat. So if you do have any questions, feel free to pop them in and I'll shoot them to Callum. I think it just makes generally good business sense to build accessibility in. It's also one of those elements of quality that's really easy to build in as part of your dev process, but really hard or nearly impossible to build it in once you've released a product or feature, right?
That's really true. Because as I mentioned, accessibility is effectively a design practice. That means shifting all of your thoughts about accessibility as far left, as far early as you can, and not just from a UX perspective as well. The way that you develop and you marshal your coding is going to have a big impact on your accessibility as well. You're talking about adding things into the code, such as ARIA labeling, the way that you put your code together so that data actually flows and makes sense without the context of any sort of visual or UX design as well. The way that you write information down, the way that you provide that information, the way that it's interactable with things. And how operable it is. It all comes from those design principles. So if we get to a point where we're testing and we're only thinking about accessibility at the end of a process, in that very waterfall kind of testing comes at the end kind of view, which I don't subscribe to. If we only come to it there, that just means that we're going to find issues that should have been really resolved way earlier in the process. It's going to require a lot of redesign. It's going to require a lot of recoding. And that's why a lot of businesses tend to go, oh, well, we don't need accessibility. We just won't have blind people using our site because of the sheer volume of work that would be required to go back and retroactively fix a lot of these things. And yes, I have seen product owners who have been like, oh, I just won't have blind people using my site then. You go,
Well, yes, but there are also, if businesses make enough accommodating means outside of a website, not all of your information has to be accessible in a digital format. There has been a lot of court cases where the phone has provided the same amount of service. I don't think that argument is going to hold up for forever into the future. But it's definitely something that has come up, that you can provide reasonable accommodations that are outside the scope of building your technology accessible from the ground up. I don't think it's the best solution, but hey, at least you're not likely to potentially get your arse sued if your phone lines work.
Yeah, and as we said, it's completely about making things like engageable with as many different types of customers as possible. If you want to say, here's my website offering, but there's a phone line, or there's a person stood there, or there's whatever to get around, to make things engageable. If you want to ship out to every potential customer somebody to sit over your shoulder and read out the website, that's a totally viable workaround. Well, not viable because that's really expensive. That would be a perfectly acceptable workaround for things. But having a phone line, having customer services, you're not preventing people from accessing your goods and services or your product at that point. It's just the specifics around that one interface, isn't the best for them, but you've provided others as well. So yeah, that's a really important thing to remember, is to say, there isn't just one way of doing this. Our website doesn't have to be perfect if we're offering something else. Another really important thing to remember is that operating systems are our friends.
Mm.
Operating systems solve a lot of problems for us. You can put like a number of different like color overlays on Macs and Windows machines. You can zoom your browsers. You can add dark mode to browsers. There's so much that the operating system or your browsers will do for you that will actually help you get to being more accessible. So you don't necessarily have to have solved every issue, but you have to be able to show that you can engage with every issue. So, you know, websites that force a certain size of text or force certain coloration or contrast are going to say, well, I'm overwriting anything that the users try to implement via the operating system. And that's going to basically prevent you being as accessible as possible in the names of branding or so on. So you've made that choice. But, you know, a simple solution is just say, make it so that the user can interact with and sort of change the experience based on their needs as well.
One thing that I've learnt from accessibility testing in my career is that the simplest solution is generally the most accessible by default. You want an accessible website? Just do plain HTML. Make sure your HTML is well structured with headings and is well laid out, and you don't have some giant JavaScript library that has 100 divs embedded in each div just for its basic table view. And it's just funny to if you try to simplify your process or your website as much as you can, such that it is mostly plain HTML and JavaScript is only being used where it needs to be, you have like more accessibility by default.
Yeah, the more you strip from things, I mean, the less branded, the less pretty it looks, but the more you strip, the easier it is to engage with. And that even comes in terms of, if you think about it in terms of language, we can all try to sound smart by using very complex and very verbose and very grandiose language for things. But you get a lot more engagement with people if you keep it simple. Do what Monzo does, talk like real people, you know, rather than like use very florid, very rococo, very flourished language. Just say, I'm using fancy language. And then people know what you mean. So you're being more accessible. So that's that sort of simple way that you can say, like, the simpler you keep things, the more people that can engage with it, understand it, and use it.
It's one of those things that on mobile app teams, I've had the conversation with designers about, well, what type of font should we use? Because the designers will have opinions on what is a nice font that represents the brand. But if you just use the standard font on the mobile platform, you get things like font increases, and screen readers just play nicer with those by default. And in my previous company, there were two different mobile app teams. One of them was for the bank, and the bank had actually transitioned to having the plain iOS default font everywhere for its new design system, simply because it was easier to work with. Whereas we were on the investment and the superannuation retirement fund side, we were still using a custom font.
Yeah. And this brings up an interesting point as well, that's really key to talking about accessibility and also exploratory testing in general. We're here to provide information that's useful and relevant back to our teams to help shape design decisions. Accessibility and information about accessibility can help us to shape our design decisions. But one of those decisions might be, no, we've chosen as a product owner, as a company, we value our branding and our impact into the market more than we do for this particular app or accessibility. So we have to know when, as you know, accessibility testers, as exploratory testers, to hang back or to make small little increments. Remember, this isn't zero sum. Any improvement that you can make will help some people. So don't let perfect be the enemy of good when we're coming to this. Remember that there's lots of different things in play. Just because something isn't perfectly accessible, there might be reasons for that, or there might be a business strategy behind it as well. So it's just a big overarching thing on this. Yes, accessibility testing is really important. We want things to be accessible. It's the right thing to do generally. But commercially, remember that we're here to help support making those design decisions, for our customers, for our clients, and so on. We can help bring up the risks about, these people might not be able to use this, or we can showcase inspirational things to show other websites that have done things in a more accessible way that look amazing and bring in more people to engage with our product. But we're not here to sort of say, well, you haven't exactly used this ARIA label. Oh, you haven't exactly done, AAA standards of accessibility for this small commercial website. So we have to remember the context in which we're doing our accessibility testing as well.
And before we jump into standards, which is going to be the next section, I would just like to highlight some of the benefits that's not just a more inclusive design with building out a little bit more extra accessibility. You can, I think I'm getting a little bit of feedback. No, that's fine.
You right?
Yep. Yeah, I think I'm just getting a little bit of feedback back from your microphone.
If I do my audio settings, can I change? I can't actually change the volume of it, unfortunately.
I can turn it down. I think maybe that movement was just better.
Oh, there we go. Does that help?
Yeah, I think that's fixed it.
Whoops. Sorry. Yes.
It's just I haven't mastered the being able to talk while you hear yourself talking at a 30-second delay. It's something that I did practice a little bit working in a little bit of radio, but it's like I need to fix it so I can focus.
I had that. I had feedback when I was playing Dungeons and Dragons recently, and trying to dungeon master and be very creative and improv and doing voices and everything with that 30-second delay. You're like, wait, what did I say? Makes things harder. Yes, these big thick glasses are not just for show. I am that much of a geek in real life as well.
Yeah, that's fine. It's not like I've got a display of board games sitting in the background.
Yes, I'm really interested. And then hit my Dungeon Mastery books as well.
Okay. Yeah. But yeah, so some of the side benefits that your team might experience if they start building out a little bit more accessibility is it can make your web automation a little bit easier because you can combine testing labels and accessibility labels, because the technology that's used for automation is often the same technology that screen readers will use to help structure and find elements on a page as well. You'll also make it easier for search engine bots to scan your websites as well. So having good accessibility also improves your SEO standards with the main search engines out there as well. So there can be a whole bunch of other business benefits for focusing on accessibility, and it's not just increasing the audience or making your website more applicable to more users.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, a big part in accessibility, again, as I've said, is marshalling your code early to make sure that it flows and makes sense from a logical standpoint, which means if you strip any CSS layers from it, the information that's presented is still meaningful and understandable. So by having that code for any pages that you have really clear, really understandable, like you've got your headers, you've got your body, and so on, and also simple, as you've said, it's going to make your sort of static analysis a lot easier as you review the code. It's going to make it a lot easier to actually see where in the code the issues might be. And as you've said, hook your automation into that code because of the simplicity of that code as well. And also, as we move away from very bespoke, fancy specific things, like as you were saying, like specific design typography, towards the standards that the operating system may come with, a lot of the issues there have already been solved for us. The operating system would have done a lot of that testing for us, and we've reduced our risk down by not implementing, a lot of overhead and change to our product. So, as I've said, the operating system is our friend, but it's also our friend as testers because they've solved a lot of the problems for us. If we're not crafting something ourselves, we can sort of take that as a third-party supplier and assume that they've done that testing. It's just the integration we have to worry about at that point.
Yeah, it's like if you're using Apple's standard UI elements, they tend to be more accessible by default than using a third-party system that a single developer somewhere has built.
That's right. And also, specifically because you mentioned mobile web design, if we want to start moving towards progressive web apps, which is sort of the next generation of web apps, those ones that they are held online, but they're partially installable, they act like an installed device. The standards that have been set out for progressive web apps by Google indicate a level of accessibility as well.
Okay.
So yeah, it's a really interesting thing. It's sort of the next level to where we're getting to with our application development. So things like your Chrome browser and the Lighthouse tool in your Chrome browser will start to include things like accessibility, because that forms part of what the next generation of applications should be, what our progressive web apps should be.
Okay. So before we jump into some live pair testing, can you give us a brief overview of how to navigate web accessibility standards?
Yes. So web accessibility standards, they look really scary. You've got the WCAG 2.1 open there, and it's a big list of things. The first thing
this
that
is a
I
giant
like to...
page. Oh, yeah.
So what this basically boils down to, this is a lot of specifics that the Web Consortium Alliance is asking us to achieve to make sure that things are accessible. Accessibility comes in different standards, from A, which is your basic, AA, and through to AAA. AAA is your gold standard. That's the kind of standards that you'll only ever reach if you're working in government work. AA is usually good for commercial, and A is like you're starting out, you're getting there effectively.
I think there's only one AAA standard website that I know of in Australia, and that's Vision Australia.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I think UK Gov is trying to aim for AAA as well, and
Okay.
I know Amazon generally is pretty good for a lot of things, and they're sort of AA to AAA as well. So some of the really big companies are sort of driving on this as well. So what we have effectively from our WCAG 2.1, WCAG 2.1, WCAG, however you want to say it, how we want what it's broken down into are these different components, these different elements of accessibility that we want to focus on. So we have perceivability. Can somebody see or perceive or hear the content that's there? Is it, yeah, am I able to perceive it so that I can interact with it? The next section is how operable is it? So how can I use the stuff that's there? Is there one way of doing it? Do I have enough time to do it? Can I use a keyboard to do it? So this is the operability. So can I perceive it in the first place? Can I interact with it in another place? The next stage is its understandability. So understandability basically means I can see it, I can interact with it. Do I know what I'm doing with it? So how easy is it for me to take in this information and then reuse that so that I know what I'm doing with it? The next part is about robustness. Robustness is probably one of the simplest ones, I would say, and it's mostly about compatibility. So think about browser and device compatibility there. So how are these perceivability, operability, and understandability components used across a number of different tools, a number of different sites, a number of different locations? How is it passed? What status messages we have there? And there is a conformance section there as well that we don't really tend to focus on too much. It's mostly about, have we also conformed to our requirements that we had in addition for the functionality? So that's the sort of like the meta part over it. So we had all these things from WCAG, but also how do we meet the requirements that our users had?
I found this big list of requirements it was hard to distill. So in a previous team, our minimum accessibility standards for our mobile features was, does it accommodate font increases? And can a screen reader see the same information? We were only aiming for a real minimum standard, but if we met that with every user story, it gave us at least a solid baseline to make future enhancements later on.
Yeah, and that's really important because remember, as we said, any improvement helps more and more people. So it's not zero sum. You don't have to hit everything to be more accessible. You pick and choose what you can implement. Now these are auditing standards effectively, so that you can get accreditation, so that you know that you've got to a certain level of or other people know you've got to a certain level of accessibility. And what these mean really, perceivability, operability, understandability, covers the whole gambit of different types of disability as well. So perceivability, like you said, most people will focus on screen readers and text size, but what about deaf users?
Yes,
So
with I
there's
mean, like with the mobile app, we didn't have any audio, so it was.
yeah. So a lot of that usually is solved because you don't have audio in there. But if you linked to videos, for example, do they have captioning and so on? So
Or at
there's
least
this
or at least there's a transcript available on the website.
exactly. That's right. Our operability, that comes into things like motor as well as visual and audio based disabilities. And our understandability comes into, say, learning difficulties and cognitive ability. When we talk about understandability, we talk about readability. So that's like, how easy is it for me to read something and understand it? So what's my reading level needed? Am I using very over complex jargony words that is really hard for people? Is this something a bit more simpler?
So
But
you can
predictability,
also see with this page that you've got a heading and a paragraph structure, and it's not a full page full of text. Often a whole page of text is really hard for a single person to comprehend. Even someone with neurotypical tendencies would still
yeah.
struggle to read a whole page of text.
Yeah, there's been loads of studies that sort of suggest that like you get to big paragraphs of more than about 6 or 7 sentences, and people just can't focus on it anymore. So yeah, it's about having empathy for different types of people. When you're doing accessibility testing, like knowing a bit more about psychology and how people work generally really helps that, because you start to use those as heuristics or ways of thinking to start to understand what looks good, what's easy. So yeah, breaking things up. Think about PowerPoint. The best PowerPoint presentations you see probably have about 3 bullet points on a slide and no more information, because it's easy to take in. Whereas those people that have a wall of text is a bit like heavy duty, a bit scary to read. You go, oh, I've switched off.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then just coming back into understandability, the predictability of things as well. So we're talking about people who are, again, not neurotypical. So if you're autistic, you need a site to behave a certain way. So if there's a big blue button on different pages of my screen, that big blue button had better do the same thing each time, because I need it to be predictable. I need to be able to guess and understand and learn what your site, what your product can do. If it's very bespoke, if the blue button does different things all the time, then it's too much. So that's just trying to drill it down into, so if you think about sort of like your perception, so visual and deaf people, your operability, so people with motor disabilities or they're aging, and then understandability, think about people who are not neurotypical, who might have learning difficulties and so on. That's sort of like breaking it down in that way, so we can try to make this a bit easier to understand by thinking about the type of user that we might be thinking about here. The other way that we can do it, and the way that I've done it in the past, is I have broken this website down into its component parts via something like a mind map. I will start to take out things to say, okay, I've got perceivability. What does that mean? That means having text alternatives. That means looking at time-based media. That means looking at the adaptability of things and the distinguishability of things. And then break that down further to say, all right, having text alternatives, where might I have text alternatives for things? Okay, that's if I've got a picture, if I've got a video, if I've got an audio transcript, that's where I can break that down. So it's that exploratory testing method of going, here's a big problem, let's break it into its components, let's break it down further into its components, think about its risks that might go wrong, and then test for those.
Mm.
So that's how we can sort of start to make this more understandable. We can also realize that pretty much every success criterion for the WCAG has those different levels of hitting them as well. So we might start to say, okay, text alternatives, having what are they called? A text alternative, what are they called? A label or
okay.
a caption or something like that is enough to hit like a through to AAA. Is that enough for what we need? But what about videos? When we have time-based media, like level of A is just to provide captions. Level of AAA might be to also include like captions with different colors to denote different types of people speaking, or different timestamps with a transcript so that I don't have to pause things, or I can read it in my own time. That's also zoomable. So we can really break these things down to say, what do I need to hit? Therefore, what's good enough for me? And just focus our testing a bit.
I have a colleague who's turned a lot of these accessibility standards into little flashcards. And I was just trying to look through my drawer to see if I could find them. And they were using them they're running a program to teach undervalued youth tech skills to land high-paying tech jobs. And so they're teaching these graduates or students all these different exploratory testing techniques, and accessibility has come up. So they've been able to do an audit of a big finance company, here in Sydney in a week, when some of the bigger companies, when they do an estimate for those types of projects, will probably take a month to 2 months, or sometimes up to 3 months to do an accessibility audit of a fairly large website. So using like this flashcard based system to prompt you with these different accessibility heuristics and what to potentially cover so there's accessibility postcards as well. Let's open that one up.
These are the accessibility postcards that Elizabeth Finesse has made that are really good as well. So in a similar vein, she's put together these ones, which I think are pretty cool. They talk about the different types of accessibility. So if you look at all the files there, it says like the oral, cognitive, motor, and visual types of accessibility. And there's just some views there just to, like you said, to provide those quick heuristics to say, okay, here's what we should be looking at for these. I think it's broken down a little bit just into the symbols as well. So you can create your own ones as well as like seeing the ones that she's put together there.
Cool. So now that we've kind of covered the quick overview of the guidelines, I'm going to go to gov.uk, which is a pretty good standard when it comes to accessibility. I have a few plugins that I've installed to help me with accessibility testing. Now, which one is it? Web Disability Simulator. Oh, I didn't pin it. Okay, so let's see. Well, total color blindness.
So when I'm, so this is a good starting point. So when I start to look at my accessibility testing, what I will usually start to do is start to sweep with some of those tools. So tools are really good. They're a bit garbage in, garbage out, unfortunately, but tools are great because they allow you to pick the low-hanging fruit that are the immediate issues that we're facing here. So what we can do is we can run a sweep so that we can find any initial bugs that we want to push forward to our development teams for fixes or to discuss, as then we are looking more detailed using the WCAG guidelines as well. So it's worth doing that really high level, start at the high level, run the overall sweeps, and then start drilling into things as well there as well. So what I can see is you've started using that tool to drive out. So you've done black and white.
Yes.
And then I can't see a lot. Let me see if I can make the screen a bit bigger.
I think I can also just zoom in.
Yeah. So that's an important thing as well. So notice here that the website is allowing us to zoom into things. So when we look at our perceivability, zoom is going to be really important, and your browser's already covering that. So that's something we can note and come back to as well, because we're focused on color blindness at the moment. Cool.
I think the tunnel vision one is quite interesting.
Oh, that is interesting. So what's important about this? There's a part of the WCAG which basically says, is information reliant on information and visual cues around things as well? So by using something like tunnel vision, or by using, I think Wave has the ability to strip CSS away from a page. What we can do is we can start to identify whether or not information is getting lost through not being able to see the things around it as well. So tunnel vision, what are the other things that we've got here?
There's also like sunshine. It's like what the website would look like under bright light conditions.
So what this is about situational disability. So disability isn't just related to something that's constantly there. You can have situational or temporary disability. So yes, you can see there having a glaring light from the office, your environmental factors might have an impact. Having like loud music playing, having drilling happening outside of your window, having people around you that might be partially distracting you, that all has an impact for your accessibility of your site as well.
We do have the other types of color blindness there, and far-sightedness.
Yeah. So this is about whether or not your font at certain sizes is going to be too blurry.
Well, we can see the welcome to gov.uk.
That's right. So if we now use our zoom on our browser to increase the size of everything massively, what you can see here, yes, you can see here that the word spacing and the font typography here isn't actually of a high enough contrast or size or just distinctiveness to actually allow me to be able to make out what those words are. So from a perceivability thing, the UI is not going to help me here. It may be that I'm going to need to have some other implementation. So if we just stick to this UI design, like what ARIA labels, what screen readers would allow me to do things, and so on and so forth as well. So keep looking at sites. So if we've got yellow, green, and red, green, I'm guessing that this website isn't actually going to be that problematic. What we can see here is the website has focused on high contrast black and white, but also on blue and white as well. So that mid blue on white is really good for different types of reader, people with dyslexia, all types of color blindness. It's just easy to see things over the top of, and you can see as Sam here is changing over the types of color blindness, that blue's still looking very blue. It's a bit shaded differently, but it's not having a difficulty on reading things. And then also the rest of the site is very black and white as well, which makes it a lot easier.
I'm actually going to show an example from the Ministry of Testing Slack group. I think there's an accessibility channel in here, and someone received an accessibility report. I probably should, oh, there we go. Accessibility report, and they got a snapshot, a report. Look at this report.
Yep. And you think, what's happening there? I can't read this on this at all.
Yeah, I mean, like, even I can zoom in a little bit, and I can make out, we can make out some of those.
Make Honda, model CMC, yeah.
Yeah, so it was a vehicle registration, I think, form. Yeah.
So when we're looking at our perceivability, especially around adaptability and distinguishability, they come hand in hand. My adaptability means that for AAA standards, as a user, I should be allowed to pick the color scheme for what I find the easiest, either via my operating system or via the tool itself. So I should be able to say, I want, like with Slack that we have here, I'm able to change the color scheme that goes on there to make it easier to read, put it to high contrast, have it in dark mode, have it in black and white, and so on. And that helps with my distinguishability, because that helps me be able to, for my needs, identify what's going on here.
Yeah, I recently upgraded the theme on my blog, which now has a dark mode button in the bottom.
Yep.
And
brilliant.
The only bug I have is like now my logo is too dark, and I've got a potential fix for that. I haven't bothered fixing it, but it was pretty cool to see dark mode just working. And I
Yeah.
didn't have to do anything for that. I just updated the theme.
Oh, no, that's really cool. Yeah, it is just as simple as that, effectively, just to say, like, allow the theme to be updated.
Yeah.
What I'm going to send to you in the chat here is a really cool site. So as we change the color based on black and white and so on and so forth of our website, based on, say, like disability, color blindness, and so on, we can use this contrast checker to work out to what level of standard the contrast is for this font. So if we go back to the UK government site, we'll be able to say, okay, we've now got this shade of blue. We can inspect that to pull out the HTML or code for it, or the color that we've got here.
Oh, it's
So
an
what have we
inherited
got?
color.
Oh, that's a pain. Let's go back into the CSS, I guess. There's also some cool things. Do you have a snapshot taker, like for screen, for taking like clipboard?
I usually just do the Windows Command S shortcut.
Because what you can do using this website is you can
Yeah.
actually get from image. So if you take a screenshot of this, whack it in, and then save it and dump it into the get from image.
There we go.
Yeah, and we can drag an image into that box. Boop, boop, boop.
No, it's not.
Oh, it didn't save. So I use a really cool tool called PickPick, and that actually allows me to make screenshots that save automatically to my desktop, which is quite helpful.
Yeah, Mac does it. It's just because I'm on Windows, because the recording hardware works better on Windows. I still haven't quite figured out. There we go.
There we go. So now we can pick the color, which is that first one there, and put that in the as the background. You can see at the bottom there. That's the blue. There we go. So what we can see from this blue to green is we can now see from this blue to white, we can see it meets AA standards of accessibility as long as the font is at 18 points. So it works for the big fonts, but as we get to the smaller fonts, it's going to be more problematic there. So that's really cool. We can also then start to change that around to say, okay, but what about this white on the grey that we see in the black and white view? Or what if we start to say, what about the way that the blue shifts in color perception when we put our filters over the top of it as well? We can start to look to see how these things would be. So that's a good way of like going forward. So the first thing we can test for here is like and this is based on the perceivability. So this is immediately, we're starting to look at, we started by looking at visual perceivability here. We went into color blindness, first of all. We've already found that using that mid blue with small fonts, that's going to be a problem. It doesn't hit AAA standards. We know that, though, for the blue and the color scheme of the website, that we're not losing a lot of information, or it's not too problematic when we put on the different color filters as well. So we know that from a color, and we've seen from a contrast view as well too.
So this has been one of those considerations where the designers are like, well, we probably know this isn't AAA compliant, but it's we think the calming effect of having a nice blue color there is slightly more important than having a good accessibility.
Which is interesting as well, actually, because where this is a government website, I would be expecting it to try and be hitting AAA standards. So I'm actually surprised that that color blue isn't coming up as a better one, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I wonder if there is a slightly better blue. So if we're doing white text, we probably want a slightly dark. Oh, actually, that was. Can I undo that? Oh, cancel.
Oh, yeah. There we go.
Background color. So we probably want a slightly darker.
Mid blue, yeah. The closer we can get to black and white, effectively, you can see. Do you see the green boxes down the bottom under background and foreground? That's showing you how good it is, effectively.
Yes.
So if you,
So that one, that blue there, is not quite.
Nice dark blue.
Not quite. It hits all the other standards, but there's one red box. Yeah. So
And then,
that one
getting
is
lighter, really bad. So the closer we can basically get to black and white. So either a white background with black text, or black background with white text, the higher the contrast is. Now, that doesn't take into account other things though. If you have dyslexic users will either want a slightly yellowier background, or you might want a slightly purple background. And also, yes, dyslexia, the dyslexia font, we're looking at those as well. Just generally, if we're thinking about fonts at this point, and if we want to drive into our perceivability for dyslexic users and our understandability, one thing that we can do is we can start looking at our fonts next. So for fonts, we can either look at the UI, or we can start diving into the code to start having a look at what's going on there. And we can start to say, okie dokes, are our fonts, first of all, how many of them do we have on a page? Because that adds to visual clutter and makes it harder to read. So if we count the number of different typographies and styles that we've got on this page, so you can see Welcome to Gov UK is big and bold. That's one.
Yeah.
And then under it, you've got the best place to find government services and information. That's the second font. And then simpler, clearer and faster is bold. That's another one. Then on the right-hand side there, you've got popular on Gov UK. That's another size and another type of font. And then under that you've got these bold ones. Yeah. Exactly. And then in the search box, you've got search on gov.uk. That's a grey one. That's another one. That's the 6th. And then the links under that are blue with an underline. That's 7. In the little cookies box above, you had some other types of font as well going on. There's 3 more there. And then directly under that's another Gov UK. That's 5. Do you see how many types of typography we've got here? We haven't just got header 1, header 2, body. We've now got so many different types of text and font and boldness and so on going on. That's a lot of visual clutter. If I wasn't neurotypical, I'm going to struggle, or if I had ADHD, I'm going to really struggle to read this page. There's just a lot going on. So do think about how do we pare back our designs to make things easier and more perceivable as well. From the font specifically, and I see you've got Open Dyslexic there, which is really cool. We don't have to go for very fancy fonts. Most of the fonts that come as standard on your operating system will be good enough. But what we're looking for is a nice, clean sans serif font, ideally, where the things like the G's and the Y's and the letters that could be either way around, like Q's and G's and all those sorts of things, look different. And when they're turned around, so each type is very like a D and a P, there you go, D and Q, D and P, look different from each other when they're flipped, so that we can be very clear of what our words are. That we have good line spacing between things as well. So can you see on the cookies on Gov UK, there's actually quite a nice line spacing between these things. So and in between the words as well. So we need to look for the gaps between our words and our letters, and between the lines themselves are looking quite good.
Okay.
So all of that.
I just don't think this plugin's working for me on this.
That's okay, because what we can do, like I said, tools are very garbage in, garbage out. We don't have to use tools for these types of things. We can do it by eye as well. So if we're looking at dyslexic fonts, as I've said, we want ones that are sans serif, that have like differences in the typography, so that we can actually make out what those letters are, and that they've got good spacing between them as well. So anything like Arial is really good. Anything like Century Gothic, I think, is okay. The standard one that comes with Max, I can't remember what that's called, but that's a good one. And everybody's favorite font, Comic Sans. Comic Sans is always good as well, which is why you use it in a lot of church flyers or school flyers or things, because it's easy for children. It's easy for dyslexic people to read as well.
Yeah. Like to do, when I'm looking at fonts, I like to do the IL1 test from a readability point of view. It's like if I can tell the difference between a capital I, a lowercase L, and a few of the other characters that can be quite similar, I view that font a little bit nicer.
Yeah.
Especially, also the difference between 0 and O. If
Yeah.
someone's given you a random password generator and you can't
Yeah.
tell the difference and you can't copy paste the password, you have to do, and you've got multiple characters in that string. It takes you a couple of attempts just to get that right.
And we've focused here on Roman characters, but if we were to start looking at hiragana, katakana, or any kanji, it's very specific because our font needs to be able to show the stroke order that we're looking at as well. So depending on, this is a Gov UK, but it depends on what languages that we want to support. We may have to start thinking about our fonts for things like, the kanji and much larger, or yes, Arabic fonts as well. Like how easy is it to read in those things?
I get a lot of Arabic ads because I have an Arabic translation as part of my Google.
No, that's good. And also Arabic is good because it goes right to left as well, so we can
Yeah.
start seeing how that works.
Yeah.
But the boldness on some of these fonts, I don't know if Sanskrit and Arabic fonts work well in bold, but I think they're a bit harder to read.
Yeah.
Just okay.
Yeah, the headings are a little bit.
That's right.
But it looks like they do attempt to render right to left.
Yes, they do, which is good. Some things don't render. Gov.uk doesn't render. I don't know if that's deliberate.
I think that's like the website URL in COVID-19 is not translated. But other than that, that looks like a fairly good. Oh, this is.
That's Welsh, so that's a specific other language that hasn't been translated.
I thought something stuffed up with the translation there.
So here's a time for us to now start to look for our exploratory testing to focus on something we've just seen. So we have a link there that says about going into Welsh. So if we click on this, we can start to see whether or not our font and our visual acuity is going to work on the Welsh site as well. And we can see here, other than the fact that the top part in cookies is not translated, and neither is the search on gov.uk, and neither is that black bar that's for the breadcrumbs, and the homepage isn't translated either. So there's a couple of bugs there, unrelated to. No, those are related to accessibility because it has to be understandable. We've got a number of things here where you said, I want you to translate this into Welsh for me, and you haven't done that. And this is like navigation. This is important stuff. And your cookies, which is a legal requirement that hasn't been translated into Welsh. And your search is navigatable. So there's a lot going on here. Important parts of the website, important parts of the navigation that if I could only speak Welsh, I would not be able, or only read Welsh, I would not be able to understand on this page. Now, we may be able to say, okay, but Welsh is always a second language, or their second language is always English, so there won't be a problem there. And there's loads more here that hasn't been translated.
Yeah, basically the whole footer is not. It looks like the header and the footer, like this section here. Actually, this is an outlier. This probably. It might be a term that's used broadly enough on the internet that you can kind of get the context.
That might be an assumption that we're making, because I haven't looked at a number of Welsh websites to know if titles stick to being like in English rather than in Welsh or not.
Okay.
But the ironic thing about it is actually the link to change this to Welsh, which is in Welsh, that bit isn't translated. That's where the control is for it, and that's not being translated.
Yeah, well, that's what I was confused about, that term, that string down the bottom, was when it was in, I thought something stuffed up with when I had translated to Arabic, because I'm like, well, that's not English.
Yeah. And interestingly, when you click on it, it doesn't actually change over to being a change this back to English font either. It just says, yep, Welsh. It says something in Welsh. So if I accidentally click on this, I don't know now what I'm looking at, and I don't know where to get to change this away from being Welsh as well, because there's no control for that. It's a static link.
Yeah, but then if you click on some other link, it's going to go back to the English site. So it looks
Interesting. So it
like
doesn't persist it.
it's not a persistent toggle. It seems like they've just listed all of their Welsh content,
Yeah.
and I guess it's not really a full website translation.
No. Okay. So we've got to there. So we're having a look around as well at the perceivability of things. So the next thing that we would tend to look at is so we've looked at different types of users' visual acuity. We've looked at the font to see how readable things are, and we've looked at the translations. What we can now look at is, are there any elements on this page that I can't understand because they don't have the text related to them? So we've got here, we've got a number of images. Do they have alternative text? So you've got an alt text texter tool, which is really cool.
Yeah, alt text is missing on the budget 2021.
There we
But
go. And on that.
That's fine. I don't even know what that picture is, even when I can see it.
That's a red box. It's part of a British government chancellor's thing. I don't have all the details of our government, but that's it's like where they keep all their special like government budgetary information. So it's like a specific thing there.
Okay. Yeah. So the news articles don't have.
Yeah. And that hands, face, space, fresh air thing is probably a really important image that we want to be sharing with everyone at the moment.
Yeah.
So
if we go into that article.
Yeah.
If it will load. Will you load for me?
Is it because it's still got the tool open? There you go. So normally, we're doing this very quickly, by the way.
Yeah.
Normally what I would do is I would use my mind map, and I would structure out my testing to say, we're looking at this, then we're looking at this, then we're looking at this, or we're exploring to find information related to this area of accessibility with this. I just wanted to make that clear because I can see at the moment we're doing something that's a bit more ad hoc in our exploration. And we haven't specifically set out a charter, or we haven't set out a mission or an area in which we're looking. We're definitely finding stuff, so it's important, but we're not planned in our testing as well. And I just wanted to sort of shift that view that exploratory testing is just this chaotic ad hoc thing that can't be planned for. But to say we can plan for it, we can go through each of the things systemically and try and find information related to them. It's just for this example, to be more dynamic and not spend all our time creating a mind map, we're sort of just having a look and starting to investigate stuff to find low-hanging fruit effectively to begin with.
Yes, because we've only got an hour for this pairing session, and we're doing it as volunteers. No one's, paying us to do this stuff. I'm hoping that Twitch or YouTube do start paying me at some point, but it takes a long time to build that stuff up.
Yes.
Right now, this is just to help explore. So where is this? I think it's.
So what we have here, do you see on the right of the coronavirus title there? We've got hands, face, space, fresh air. Are they images? And they're not. They don't have. Is that an image, or are they actual fonts? What have we got here?
We've got a logo.
It's a logo, and does it have any? It has ARIA hidden true, and does it have? It doesn't have any. Yeah, doesn't have any alternative text. If we extend that out, clip path is just a URL. A lot of numbers there.
Yeah, and it's just got a.
So.
Oh yeah, so it's just a SVG type of clip art.
Yeah, but there's the path there for the word. Is that actually text, or is that actually part of the SVG?
Oh.
Do you see that bit there where it says hands?
Yeah.
Is that actual text? If you use path M, it's got a lot of faff there for white slash path. It doesn't actually look like it's. Can you select that hands bit, like as if it were a font?
I can't highlight it.
Yeah, this looks like it's a part of an image to me that they've just put under each other. So what they could have done here is made the hands, face, space, fresh air thing into an actual font, into actual text, so it would be more perceivable for people, but they haven't done that here. The dev tools, just as a point of order here, getting close to the code is a really good way of identifying like your accessibility as well. We don't have to be reliant on tools for everything. You can use the dev tools, which is ironically a tool in itself, but we can look at the code itself to start looking at things and to understand more about like how this is accessible or not. So don't be afraid to start inspecting things to say, is this text? What's the size of it? What's the font of it? What's going on here? We don't just have to be reliant on things like Axe or screen readers or so on.
Yeah.
And that's good as well, because as we get better at looking at the code and getting closer to the code, we can spot issues before they've even started or they've even finished building things. So we can get involved through pairing with our developers as well. Okay, so we found that there's an issue with that image there, definitely. There's an arrow, which is a yellow arrow there. What's that? Does that have any alt text? I'm guessing not. Oh, that's yeah. No. And what does it do? Is it a link?
By the looks of it, it is a div with a link icon. Then it has a link in the for the href.
Okay, but we're not losing out on information, because the information of find out on the rules and what you can and cannot do, and the fact that that's a link, it's underlined and it's mentioned as a link because it's a span there, that we've already captured that. So that's probably not an issue, the a long arrow that we've got there.
Yeah.
What about...
It says that there's only one external image found.
NHS logo. So that'll be the thing that's in the box down there. So that's the NHS there. So does that has no information as well, I'm guessing.
Oh, it has an alt NHS.
Okay. You're not losing any information. I mean, it'd probably be good to say this is an NHS logo rather than just alt of NHS, but still, that's something. And that's important because that's the National Health Service. So that's information from the health provider there. So that's somewhat important.
Yep. We are actually just over time now.
Brilliant. We got into some stuff. We did some of it.
Yeah, we did some testing, which is more than my last live stream, which was just more of a...
But we found some really interesting things. We got closer to the code. We started to investigate perceivability on things. We used tools, but we also used what we understand, and we started to look from the WCAG. As we went further into this, we could probably start to look at understandability. We could start to look at... we actually started to do that somewhat, because we looked at all the different typographies and how confusing that could be to somebody who was not neurotypical. So perceivability, but also understandability as well. The fact that all of the links, sometimes they were blue and in some fonts with an underline. Sometimes they've got an icon next to them. Sometimes they're in black text and bold. You know, how do I know what's a link and what's not a link? Can I predict what's a link? Is all bold text a link? Is all black text a link? Is all blue text a link? I don't know. It changes each time. So we got into quite a lot of stuff that wasn't just screen readers there. And that's a really good thing to get into when we're doing accessibility, because we're providing more info there.
Yeah. And you did mention that we could use charters or chapters, charters to help structure exploratory testing. What would be an example of a charter you could use in this situation?
Yeah, so what we were just looking at there, we could say, so explore the UK Gov UK page related to COVID-19 with the dev tools and the tool that you had open to discover information related to whether or not text alternatives apply for imagery on that page, or the risk that text alternatives don't apply to this page, or the risk that blind people would be losing information that they couldn't see from images. So there's a lot of ways we could say that.
I just wanted to give an example charter for in case anyone is listening and they haven't heard the term before. If you do want to read more on how to use charters in exploratory testing, Explore It is a well-referenced book. It is actually, I think it was released in 2005, so it is becoming a classic. But if you only read one software testing book, and some of them are a bit dry. I've got a couple that I'm trying to read at the moment, but it's a bit hard to get through technical books sometimes, I think.
Yeah, very much. But Explorer is an amazing book. Elizabeth Hendrickson, there, really good writer, explains things really well, I think, as well. So definitely that one's, yeah, worth a read. And I've based a lot of how I structure charters and missions and so on around what I've read from that book.
And if you do pick up a book, you don't necessarily have to read the whole thing to be able to get useful information out of it. I've only read the first couple of chapters of this book to get like an idea of how to structure a charter, how to talk about exploratory testing with teams. And I'm sure there's more information I could gain from this book, but I will admit, not even I have read it all from front to cover. So don't feel bad if you do pick up a book, and just pick out the useful bits that you find interesting.
Yeah. Remember, with everything, it's not zero sum. You don't have to do everything for it to be good. Don't have to reach perfect. You can just get better and get gooder as you go.
Cool. So, do you have any final remarks for anyone who's watching, Callum?
Yeah. So I hope you enjoyed looking at using exploratory testing to find specific information related to accessibility. Do remember that exploratory testing is your friend. Your OS and your browsers are your friend when it comes to exploratory testing, because this is an area where it's a very human side of design. And it's very much needed that we provide human information about the designs and how humans will interact with that design. It's an area where exploratory testing can really, really support us, more so than automation and so on. Automation can only find the surface level that our tools can give us of exploratory, but then the understanding and the meaning behind it has to come from that human interaction with our tools as well.
Yeah, there's also a sentiment that you can actually use some code checking tools as part of your build pipeline to check for accessibility, common accessibility bugs. However, they'll only catch maybe 30% at most, and it's just really low-hanging fruit that's often fairly easy to pick up through manual testing anyway. But sometimes it's good to have a check to make sure no one's pushing button with label button into your code base.
Yeah, definitely that. And then also, final thoughts. Remember, don't let perfect be the enemy of good. And know what information that you're trying to provide back to your designers. Any changes are good changes. The more people that can use things, it doesn't have to be everyone, but the more people that can use and interact with our tools, the better, because we're helping more people and it's the right thing to do.
Well, thank you.